Welcome back and thank you for staying with us. On Sunday, July 7th, President Muhammadu Buhari signed the Africa Continental Free Trade Areas Agreement at the Africa Union Summit, which held in Niamey, Niger Republic. This brings to 53 the number of countries on the continent to ratify and append their signature after extensive consultations with stakeholders. The president delayed the signing of the agreement, according to government, because of the need to appraise its potential and possible danger to the local economy. Very apt reason indeed. But we need to check that thing out properly this morning, and we have three types of economists with us. But economists all the same. I'll start with our studio in Lagos. We have Mr. Henry Boyo, who is an economic analyst and a manufacturer himself. So he plays in the local business.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Boyo.
Thank you.
Then from Abuja, we have Mr. Tokwe Fashua, an economic analyst. Good morning.
Good morning.
And we also have Mr. Odilim Enweagbara, who is a development economist. Dr.
Thank you for having me.
Enweagbara, good morning, and thank you for joining us this morning. Now, the basic question anybody would ask is what I will ask you straight away. Of what benefit is this to our economy? People are talking about our porous borders. We have no organized private sector. People are able to ship out products as they wish. So, of what benefit is this agreement to us?
Thank you, Alero. I think that question should have been directed to the government, since indeed the real sector were supposed to have been involved. The stakeholders were engaged and in various discussions. But we were never told whether they had found a common ground before the signing of the agreement last week. I recall that in March last year, when the heads of states held their convention, excuse me, in South Africa, the vice president was there, and expecting that the president would join him. It didn't happen to be so. But I recall when he came back, he said something to the effect that he has had the opportunity as vice president and as a legal luminary to cite some of the treaties that Nigeria has entered to in the past decades or so. And he wonders what kind of Nigerians signed these treaties. And so he also expressed caution, even though he went initially as part of a delegation to await the president's endorsement. But he did say that the treaties we have had in the past have never really served Nigeria well. One would expect that as a committed Nigerian, he would have put in process a process of examination or reconsideration of certain areas of those treaties which he found rather wanting. But we haven't had anything with regard to that. But coming specifically to the African Free Trade Agreement, I think we should be very careful for a very simple reason. What the AfCFTA is all about is a market. You want to participate in the market in order to be able to sell your goods. Interestingly, in the Nigerian context, we have not yet got to saturation point. In other words, it's not as if our factories are producing more than enough. We haven't been able to meet the local demand. And don't forget, within the African context, the Nigerian economy is possibly over a quarter of the total. So you can imagine Nigeria is the destination for most of the. I will take
200 million of us,
200
right?
million people. I'll take a very good example, which I'm sure people like you will be current about. When you visit ShopRite at any time, you take a look on the shelves, you probably find that maybe 60, 70, or even 80% of the goods there are imported from South Africa. So you have to be very careful to ensure that we have not put ourselves, we have not played a game in which we ultimately will be the loser.
Mr. Fashua, the picture we see here is a picture of potentials and how it weighs against what's on ground. Let's look at let's look at some figures. 15% said that 15% of African exports go to other African countries, as against 58% of Asian products staying within Asia, and about 67% of European products staying within Europe. With this signing, do you think that is likely to change? And considering the fact that Mr. Boye has also talked about the Nigerian market being the destination market.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, right. Okay. I actually take an opposite position from Dr. Boyo there, because I believe it's a fait accompli. You know, intra-Africa trade used to be around 6%, until recently moved up to around 15% as a result of globalization and, you know, the ease of moving around a little bit and so on. Intra-European trade was about 70%, and it's still growing, even with Brexit. You can see the British people trying to eat their cakes and have it, and now not quite sure whether they want to stay in or they want to go out and so on. We live in a world driven by globalization, capitalism, and all of that. Nigeria is practicing some variant of capitalism. You know, some say it's chronic capitalism, whatever. China is practicing state-led capitalism. All of the CCECC, all these companies we see here, even the biggest bank in the world today, are owned by Chinese government, and they're moving aggressively. So the point now is that we cannot be an island on our own. Number one, I'm of the opinion that African countries should trade among themselves properly, and that we should also, by that, we should encourage ourselves to get productive. The big problem that I'm looking at now, I saw a news item where they said the European Union has given about 40 billion to these African countries in order to be able to, you know, effect the AfCFTA. And I'm wondering, why are you giving us money? Nothing is for free. You know, why are we not being able to do this on our own? And, you know, I would actually put the blame on the doorsteps of this country, Nigeria, supposedly with the largest economy in Africa, which I don't believe. I'm sorry. The fact that you have so many people, even our population figures are wrong. You know, a lot of them are bloated up by politics. And I'm sure you're going to have the professor coming from the MPC talking to you, you know. So we've got all this problem with our data. Number one, Nigeria should ordinarily be driving this process, even if that data was true. Even if it wasn't true, why did we hope that, you know, we're going to close our eyes, the free trade agreement would disappear, and, you know, when the world had moved on, and Africa, look, let's say this. People say we don't have anything to export. It's not quite true. Go to Aba there. You know, as a matter of, as I speak to you, a lot of guys are exporting things, all the shoes and clothes and all that, from Aba into other countries in Africa as we speak. Our music industry, the Nollywood industry, all of these things are being pushed. I've been to all the countries I've been to in Africa. They lap up from Kenya to Uganda to Zambia to Cote d'Ivoire, not to the entire West Africa. Go to Liberia. It's owned by Nigeria. You know, so why can we not say, okay, let us challenge ourselves more to push these things out? The fact that we haven't fixed the electricity problem, for me, is not an excuse. The fact that we are this level of low productivity means that we should actually be ramping up on productivity in order to take on the African continent. Of course, we need to...
If I may come in, I'll have to interrupt you here briefly. We'll just go on a quick break. When we come back, we'll look at all of this as against the variations and disparities in development across the African countries. Please join us again. Welcome back, Sunrise. We're still looking at the Nigerian economy and the AfCFTA. Mr. Faswa, you were talking earlier about issues of development, but let's bring in Mr. Nwegbara here. Mr. Nwegbara, when we look at issues of development, you definitely would consider the levels, the different levels of development we have across Africa, not just West Africa, not to talk of the different income levels, so to speak. How would all of this weigh on the AfCFTA?
First and foremost, I can't agree more with my brother Tope because must now wake up, whether he likes it or not. First, I disagree that it's going to be disadvantageous to Nigeria. It's a double-edged sword. What will happen now, whether you like it or not, is that the federal government, over a period of time, will be irrelevant in monetary and the fiscal, in a trade policy making, because the biggest places trade policies will be made will be in mega cities like Lagos and Johannesburg. So when that is the case, you discover Nigeria is going to benefit more from African free trade than not being a member. Can you imagine, in the next 1 or 2 years or 5 years, Nigerian banking industry will invade the whole of Africa? Can you imagine, as he already said, about shoemakers and clothes makers? Can you imagine in the next few years, Nigerian traders will invade entire African market, bringing in goods and services from around the world, those goods that are not produced in Africa? Can you imagine innocent motors innocent cars being driven across Africa? Can you imagine people like Dangote Cement all over Africa, Dangote Refinery all over Africa? Can you imagine people like FAB properties being spread all over Africa, FAB City being seen all over Africa? So I believe that the potential is huge. But there's a problem I am foreseeing. Ethiopia is the largest cattle producer, beef producer in Africa, because it has the largest population of cattle, followed by South Africa. That is why I was saying, you know what, we are shooting ourselves in the foot, because by the time the best, sweeter, softer, healthier beef come from Ethiopia and South Africa, our brothers that are the Fulani headers will be put out of market. That is going to be the first shock. But the good thing about Nigeria, Nigeria has a lot of entrepreneurs, potential entrepreneurs who will take over that. So what is going to happen in the beef industry is that the Dangotes of this world, the Mike Adenugas of this world, will eventually come and fill that gap and drive the beef industry across Africa. So it's a big deal for Africa, for Nigeria.
Dr. Mwangwara, pardon me, please. We understand all this, but at the same time, what about the challenge of actually producing the things you're talking about? Will these goods be able to compete when they get on the international market, even though the international market happens to be within Africa? I'm talking about cost of production, for instance. And apart from that, there's no way of measuring what goes out as opposed to what comes in. Everybody is busy exporting. The Abba shoemaker is busy exporting his shoes. It's not documented. So how do you measure so you can compare the advantage of this marriage that we have entered?
I completely agree with you, but if you, I think what we would have done is to study North American free trade area that Canada and Mexico took advantage of American weak industrial base. But of course, America, who are the owners of the Canadian and the Mexican manufacturing industries? Americans. So what do I say in essence is that at the end of the day, Nigerian government must be forced to retreat and the private sector will take over. Because that's the only way. There's no way Nigerian government will be doing socialist capitalism where Buhari will decide where certain roads will be constructed, rails will be constructed. No. The Dangotes of this world, the big Nigerian investors will take over the power sector and fill the gap and make it very competitive. The only concern I have, another concern I have is that, you know, with African free trade, there will be less revenue coming to the government. If government increases its tax, then what is called race to the bottom, companies will migrate to where the cost of doing business and also the taxes they pay are very low. There will be social implications because government will not have enough money to do social safety net programs. There will be issue of environmental race to the bottom in environmental policies and protection. These are the things we have. And also the issue of standard, quality standard. These are the areas African government, Nigerian government should work harder than trying to stop, because the flood is flawed. Nobody stops a flood. Nigeria sees, let me tell you what happened. You know, when they saw that this has come to us and we have no option, they have to sign it. If they didn't sign it, the whole of Africa will gang up against Nigeria, and then Nigeria will be the greatest loser. I agree with him. What we need to do now is to go back to the drawing board. And the government must answer. By the way, before the end of next year, this economy, when it's bankrupted, then there will be a regional economies, because regions now will merge. South-South regional economy will merge. Southwest regional economy, Southeast regional economy. So they will merge, because now it becomes the survival of the fittest. Now you discover that Abuja will be, who becomes president of Nigeria will become irrelevant, because who cares about who is the president of Nigeria when I can make my decisions at the center of Africa, Lagos, Johannesburg, Nairobi? Who cares? That is the consequences of this. It's unfortunate we find ourselves in this way. But I will tell you, I trust this country. Nigerian entrepreneurs, Nigerian businessmen will take over African economy.
Yeah, sorry. Mr. Boyo, is this therefore going to force Nigeria to make its ease of doing business actually work, and then maybe begin to fix electricity so that we can produce some more to put on this famous market? So we're not just importing.
Well, I don't know where these gentlemen get their optimism from, because the realities on ground haven't ever shown that we are serious. The things that drive any economy is not your fiscal plans, because the fiscal plans are directional, okay? But in reality, it's only a very small subplot of the whole economy, because take, for example, this year's budget is about 9 trillion or something, which is about less than 25 billion. Whereas in electricity alone, you require over $100 billion or so to fix the electricity. So you now find that the expectations of Nigeria with regards to fiscal policy applications is a little bit overstretched. The reality, of course, is that what drives an economy are the principles that are applicable everywhere. For example, you wouldn't find much activity in any economy if inflation is 10, 11, 12, 18%, because then what you're doing, you are deepening poverty in the land, because the people who are earning income are losing close to 10, 15, possibly even 20% of their income every year, which is not recognized. Consequently, anybody who has a less purchasing power of a static income will buy less. When they buy less, what happens to the people who are producing the bread and things like that? They also cut down. And when they cut down, they throw people into the job. That's how the system works everywhere. So if you think that we will dominate Africa, and yet you haven't addressed these issues that replicate what eagle economies everywhere. By eagle economy, I mean those economies where Nigerian youths struggle either by hook or by crook to get to in order to be able to get a better life. If you don't address those, the pipe dream that we will conquer Africa, indeed, why do you want to conquer a space that you don't need to conquer when you have not conquered your own internal space? If you have a situation where Nigerian companies are possibly supplying less than 10, 20% of their requirements, most of it is coming from abroad. Why don't we? China did the same thing. They even closed their borders for some time before they joined the WTO, much later. And they ensured that they were ready for competition, and we can all see the evidence. You are rushing with a broomstick and staves into a war in which people are carrying AK-47s and things like that. So you have to be very careful. It's nice to be optimistic that, yeah, we're going to do it, it's time to do it and all that. I honestly, I don't see where the optimism comes from, because...
Dr. Obara talked about if Nigeria hadn't signed the AfCFTA, the rest of the African continent would have teamed up against her.
Well,
would that have been good?
Teamed up in what manner? You say you're only supplying 20%. So let's supply the 100% first before we start wondering who is teaming up against us. Do you understand me? So it's not really whether they team up against what? We are the major economy here. We are the market. We are losing, what do you call it, almost 25 million liters of petrol every day. We have a situation...
But are those figures fact?
Well, I wouldn't be the one you would ask. You want to ask the Comptroller General of Customs, and also the former
NNPC MD, who indicated that 50 million liters of fuel were going out of the country every 25 million liters of fuel was going out of the country every day, whereas we were supposed to be consuming between 25 and 30. So if you do not recognize these issues, and we walk like the, what do you call it, into this type of battle, we are doing ourselves a disservice, because we cannot reinvent the process of creating successful economies anywhere. Tell me how you're going to be able to, look, have you asked the manufacturers what they think? It's easy for those people who have never tried to produce a toothpick to say we will do it and things like that. But I do know for certain that most manufacturers are aware that it is absolutely a daunting task. It's an uphill task for most manufacturers at the moment, because if you have to go and borrow, look, we have a system that's crazy. If you have a situation where you think, oh, money is the issue, money is not the issue. Money has never been the issue in Nigeria, because if money was the issue, the CBN would not be so involved in mopping up what excess cash from the system. So you now have a situation where a central bank is continuously mopping up excess liquidity, and nobody's asking for eternally. And nobody's asking, where is this excess liquidity coming from? And what is the implication of excess liquidity? High rates of inflation, rising cost of funds, and a weaker exchange rate. And ultimately, the need to keep subsidizing fuel supplies. It is.
Mr. Faswa,
it is.
Mr. Faswa, I want us to bring it down a little bit here. It sounds like over the top for a lot of Nigerians who are wondering the AfCFTA, is all highfalutin, is all big in there. But how does all of this affect the man out there who's trying to get his business together, who's trying to get a living? Mr. Boyer has talked about high inflation rate and the fact that the value of the naira, in the purchasing power of the naira, appears to be dropping every day. Now, one of the potential negative potentials that's likely to come with the AfCFTA in some quarters is that the SMEs will be swamped, they'll be subsumed, and they may not be able to thrive again because they have not built the capacity to compete effectively. So, would it have been better to shut down the borders effectively before signing the AfCFTA? But now that it's been signed. Oh, go ahead.
Okay. Well, first of all, the option of shutting the border against African countries is not even tenable, because for one, we know the problems we have with the borders. We know we don't have patriots at the borders. We know our borders are not even policed at all. You know what I'm saying? So a scenario where you're going to have people besieging our borders, trying to bring in different things, even from small countries like Malawi, like Zambia, like Guinea, like, you know, I mean, I don't see why we would be afraid of competing with this kind of country. These countries, I'm not putting them down at all, but, you know, I'm sorry, at some point Nigeria was sounding like, you know, that big bully who is supposed to be in university, but is still stuck somewhere in primary school. And exactly that's what we are, you know, running a monoproduct, primary product economy, selling bananas and so on, all those. In fact, we even import bananas. What am I saying? You know, when we should actually be talking about secondary products. Odilim spoke about people like Innocent. We should be pushing those things. We should be manufacturing pojo, yeah, and sending to Nigeria and elsewhere. That's the kind of thing we should be talking about. Auntie Alero asked, you know, she made a point earlier on about, you know, about the goods that are going out of Nigeria without documentation, and that's our reality right now. I mentioned ABBA earlier on. I mentioned Nollywood. I mentioned the music industry of Nigeria. How many of that is documented, you know? But even if you went to the north of Nigeria, there was a time that Garba Shehu, the current presidential spokesman, said in 2017 or thereabout that we're going to have a drought because about 500 trucks of grains go from the north of Nigeria into the northern African countries every day, to Sudan, to Mali, to Niger, Chad, and all of that. And those things are undocumented. Number one, the export proceeds don't even come back. So you can't actually say, okay, this is what was exported from Nigeria, this is the money that came back. So let me tell you what's going to happen. With African free trade, things become very formalized and documented. Number one, if you take yourself out of that, you're going to be Brexited or Niger exited without having even joined. Look at Brexit. Britain now doesn't know what it's going to do with itself. And everybody is trying to push deals. That's why I said the part where we need to be careful about is what are the interests of countries, the European Union giving us money? What is the interest of Britain? Are these guys trying to take things into Africa, using the backdoor channels? Lastly, I want to agree with Dr. Henry Boyo on one thing. If you study Greece and Germany in the European Union and why did Greece have so much problem and Germany is sitting on top of the pack, it's about economic complexity. Economic complexity is the knowledge quotient that goes into the products that you manufacture as a country. In terms of economic complexity, we're zero. Compared to South Africa, we're zero. And that's what we need to ramp up big time. Secondly, and most importantly, the country's managers, the economic managers, the president, now is the time to get serious. And that's what Odilin was saying. If you want to compete in a free trade zone, you have to ensure that your interest rates are moderate compared with the rest, because otherwise the rate at which your manufacturers and your producers of goods and services borrow is very important. Number two, your inflation has to be kept down to a moderate level. Otherwise, whatever you produce cannot be pushed into the rest of the countries you're dealing with. Your exchange rate must be better managed. You can't have uncertainty around your exchange rate, otherwise nothing is going to work. So now is the time. All of those wastes that we've been wasting in this country, all of those frivolities we've been involving in, all of those mismanagement and misspendings that we've been doing, now is the time to stop. And nobody is going to tell you, if you pack your money and throw it abroad, if you involve, in unproductive, number one, 13.2 million children on the street, that is productivity that you're losing. 26% inflation, 26% unemployment rate, and among the youth, over 40% unemployment. That is productivity. So what you need to do, you have to take care of this productivity, because at the end of the day, the value of a country's currency will be determined by the products that it sells and the complexity of those products, number one, and also by the productivity of the average person, the per capita productivity of the average person. And I think that this is a great opportunity. I can only see opportunities. Of course, we can despair and say, look, this is going to be way down on us. We don't have anything to sell. But I also see opportunities, and I think we should take advantage of it.
You didn't talk about the effect of all of this on that man on the streets who is still trying to get his business up and going. I wanted us to break it down a little bit. How would that man tap into the AfCFTA? For the common man, for me, I see opportunities for every Nigerian. I see opportunities for the average SME. Look, what needs to happen? I mentioned the monetary policy issues, right? The inflation, the interest rate, the exchange rates management. It's got to be on point. But let me say that also, number one, there's a lacuna that between why. In fact, I've been advising Nigeria. Of course, nobody listens, but I've been saying, look, we need to target double-digit growth within ourselves. Okay, there's going to be a limit. At some point, you need to crash all of these rates. Right, but if you want to achieve double-digit rate, you have to know that inflation will run away. That means that you have to do double digits, continue with double-digit inflation, perhaps higher double-digit inflation, close to the 20%. But we have wasted opportunities. But you see, no matter how we waste opportunities, we still have to wake up at some point. Look, Nigeria is an entity. Nigeria will continue to exist whether any of these players are there or not. So that's one. But most importantly, I'm saying that, look, if there's opportunity for Nigerian SMEs to grow, even in domestic consumption alone has not been actually covered, like Dr. Boyo said. Okay, but the point is also that to a large extent, the first thing I believe we need to fix, as you're fixing your monetary policy, you also have to fix your fiscal policy. Okay. Look, all right, Tope, we'll just go on another break, and he says he's insisting here that he's Mr. Boyo. We'll take a moment and we'll be back shortly. Please stay with us. Welcome back. Our closing moments. We'll start out with Mr. Dr. Mbara. Dr. Mbara, what do we do going forward? Nigeria signed the AfCFTA. What should be happening now?
As I said earlier, but before I conclude, let me add something. Dr. Boyo is somebody I respect a lot, but Dr. Boyo has to come to the reality of the world. We can't stop the flood. First and foremost, he's talking about the CBN monetary policy. You cannot be doing liquidity tightening and expect to reduce interest rate and expect to flood the system with cheap money for small businesses. Having said that, going forward, Nigeria must go back to the drawing board and retool its fiscal and monetary policy. And Nigeria must allow the private sector to drive the economy. Just like one of the presidential candidates has already said, I am going to open up Nigerian economy to 100%. At the beginning, it's going to be a problem. But over a period of time, we adjust the system and we even take over the system. I know, and I agree with him, that right now the economy is not productive enough. But you cannot continue to allow the prodigal son to continue to be prodigal. It gets to a point you tell him enough is enough. So I believe that this is a wake-up call. We are going to be hit by the flood, but we have to come out of that flood stronger, better, and more productive and more efficient, so that the corruption in Nigeria will be reduced. Look, goods and services, for example, look at VAT. Nigerian VAT is the lowest in Africa. It means now that when we create a common monetary policy, and we have custom union, it means now that we're going to have the same VAT rate between South Africa and among African countries, which means South Africa is 16%. Nigeria will now move its VAT to 16% in order to get more money. So to close, I will tell you that I see more prospects. I see a better Africa. This is the best thing that happened to Africa since Africa independence. And anybody who is saying the contrary is not fair to Africa, because the future of Africa is dependent on Nigeria, and Nigeria must drive it. And if we go backwards, South Africa, Ethiopia, and Egypt will take over. And when we are coming back as a latecomer is only taking what is left over.
Mr. Fasua. Mr. Fasua, the way forward, in conclusion.
Balanced, and that the days of waste should be over. I wish our people who run government would actually open their eyes and see what some of us see. Already we're in a box, but we can, like here, Odilim said, we can actually get out of this. You know, all this idea of thinking that what we can do for ourselves, that would rather be borrowing money from abroad. We've taken our loan to about $80 billion, but there's another almost $7 billion we intend to collect this year between the Governors Forum and the federal government, and it's perhaps going to be more. Before the end of this year, we could be looking at about $100 billion. One of the things that mitigated against the growth of Greece as against Germany is also when you have servicing, you're using most of your revenue to service debt. 70% is what it is in Nigeria. If we're not careful, it will be up to 80, 90%. And you know, we're actually facing a fiscal cliff as we speak. And I think that we should wake up. However, it's not an option for us to opt out of a free trade agreement, a free trade zone, you know, of the whole of Africa, and be the single victim country that everybody is going to besiege. And of course, we know we don't have even people, customs at our borders. Everything escapes out of this country. Everything comes into this country.
Mr. Boyer.
Where we document.
Well, I don't know how to equivocate. Let's be honest with ourselves. Do you think we can be competitive in a country in which we have maybe 70% of federal government income on current expenditure, 30% on capital expenditure, and that capital expenditure is hardly ever spent? Do you think that we truly have a hope if you spend almost 50% of your earned income to already start paying debt? Do you think that we really do have a hope when we have a situation where the greatest borrower from the banks itself is the central bank that prints the same money? Do you think that we have a hope if the same central bank that is supposed to be a custodian of the naira continues to auction rations of dollars in a market that the same CBN undeniably accepts to be suffocated with naira liquidity?
Okay.
Answer this question.
Questions.
You will find an answer. You will find the direction for the Nigerian
Boyo
economy.
is leaving us with Mr. Henry Boyo, economic analyst and manufacturer, and two other economic analysts joined us from Abuja, Mr. Tokwe Fashua and Dr. Odilim Enweagbara. Thank you all very much for coming to share your views with us this morning. Sunrise will return in just a moment with another interesting conversation. Do join us.